Depending on how you were raised and your life experiences, negotiation may be really hard for you. If you come from a historically marginalized group like women, members of the LGBTQIA plus community, people of color, immigrants, or people with disabilities, you're probably anxious and uncomfortable thinking about asking for what you want in this job offer. And that's because your whole life you've been socialized to put the needs of others first, to be gracious and grateful for what you're offered, to believe in the good of people and use people pleasing as a means of survival. At its heart, negotiation requires you to put the needs of others to the side and ask yourself what you want and need out of this deal. So it's likely you haven't been in this position many times in your life, and it will feel uncomfortable. But if negotiation is uncomfortable for you, I want you to know you're not alone. Between the ages of 5 and 9, negotiation behavior is shaped in children. We know that by the age of 9, girls have already learned to ask for less than boys and to ask for even less when they're negotiating with a male partner. So this behavior is set early, and then it's reinforced throughout our lives. The good news is that the blind spots that you'll face in this negotiation are the same blind spots that others face every day. Now, if you're someone who has no issue asking for what you want, you may still face a couple of these key blind spots that can prevent you from being as successful as you might be. So don't skip this section just because negotiation comes easily to you. Throughout a decade of coaching candidates through salary negotiation, I've identified 5 blind spots that can sabotage you in your negotiation. You might experience all of these or some of these. They might come up at different times, before, during, or after your negotiation. And they may come up with some situations or with some people, but not with others. These blind spots can run deep in your psyche, preventing you every day from asking you for what you deserve. So I encourage you to continue working to manage them in all areas of your life after this negotiation. However, what's necessary right now is for you to see, predict, and manage these blind spots throughout the job negotiation process. On page 2 of your workbook, you'll find the 5 blind spots listed in a table. As I go through each of them, I want you to fill in the first column labeled past experience. As I share details about each blind spot, think about how you typically respond in situations where you need to ask for what you want. Don't restrict yourself to job negotiations. Think about when you've been asked to take on a new project or responsibilities. Think about the division of your family responsibilities, about the boards and the volunteer commitments that you've served on in your life. If you feel like that blind spot is one that you've struggled with a lot, place a number 3 in your box. If it's one that you sometimes experience, write number 1. And if you don't identify with it, place a 0 in the box. So let's start with people pleasing. This is an adaptive behavior often established on the playground. Children who are fearful of being disliked will overcompensate and try to make people around them happy to establish protection through an emotional bond. This carries into adulthood and often into parenthood with an almost obsessive desire to be liked. People will go to extremes, filling gaps, never saying no, and suppressing their own wishes in order to be validated by others. If you find yourself worried that if you negotiate, they might not like you, well, you could be suffering from people pleasing. Now, if you feel compelled to say yes to a poor offer because you want to be in their good books, again, this is a blind spot for you. So if it's something that comes up often for you, put a 3 in the box. If it's a once in a while thing, put a 1. And if it's something that you don't really resonate with, give it a 0. Next up is humility. As a child, you might have been told to be humble. Don't brag. Don't let people think you're full of yourself, especially for teenage girls. Having the audacity to be confident and take up space, that's a recipe for social exclusion and mockery. As an adult, you may feel compelled to behave with humility because to do the opposite feels shameful. It's better to be tapped on the shoulder and told you're wonderful than tell people yourself. Except that in a recruitment process, you actually have to set your humility aside. You have to speak about your strengths. You have to demonstrate your value. And that doesn't end when the interview's over. But people with humility struggles will often underrepresent their strengths, preferring instead to demonstrate or prove themselves. So if that sounds like you, one of 2 things can happen in a job negotiation. First, you might make the colossal mistake of offering to accept a lower package with a commitment to participate in a performance review somewhere down the line. Now, this might sound like a solid plan, but it should be an absolute last resort only if you're unable to secure a higher salary through negotiation. Once you sign that agreement, you lose your power, and it becomes very, very difficult to hold your employer accountable for a raise like 6 months down the road. The second thing that happens to people who struggle with humility is that you might fall into the trap of equating that first offer with your value. So instead of recognizing it for what it is, the lowest offer that they think you might say yes to, if humility is a blind spot for you, you might just believe that that offer represents your worth. So take a moment to write down your rating. Give it a 3 if humility is always on your mind, a 1 if it trips you up once in a while, and a 0 if it's not an issue for you. The next one is generosity. And as a child, you might have been taught to serve others first, to give of yourself, never take more than you absolutely need. Sounds nice. But when generosity is a blind spot, you might be known as someone who consistently works above your pay grade, as someone who's a gap filler, someone who over delivers despite challenges, limitations, and even compensation. So in a negotiation, if you have a strong orientation toward generosity, you might accept the first offer because maybe you have the company's bottom line in mind. Now, let me be clear. If the company's bottom line is at risk, your salary is not going to make a difference, and you might want to look elsewhere. Also, much like humility, those who have generosity as a blind spot may hold the incorrect assumption that if you over-deliver long enough, you'll be recognized. If you want to be seen as a good investment, then this might be a blind spot that sabotages you. So take a moment to write down a rating of 3 if you always want to be seen as generous, 1 if it crosses your mind once in a while, or 0 if it's really not an issue for you at all. Next is faith. You might believe that people are inherently good, that good things come to those who wait, that when you believe in people, they rise to the occasion. These aren't bad beliefs to hold. However, in a negotiation, they can lead to some critical slip-ups. So faith is a blind spot that doesn't affect everyone in the same way. Early research points to it being a significant blind spot if you are an immigrant or if you hold strong beliefs about the fairness of democratic society. If faith is a blind spot for you, you might assume that the offer you receive is a fair one. You might choose to ignore the reality that the offer is the lowest offer the employer hopes you might say yes to. You might already see it as a balanced offer. The other area that might be difficult for you is follow-up. This might look like avoiding a difficult conversation if the revised contract doesn't explicitly spell out the benefits that you negotiated. Instead, you might just hold on to a belief that the other person will be true to their word. Now, that's a lovely sentiment. However, in employment law, the contract prevails. So if you had agreed to a number of terms that matter to you, but they're not written down, you won't have the evidence you need to hold your employer accountable for them. So again, take a moment and write down a rating of 3 if you have a deep belief in others, 1 if this is something that catches you once in a while, or 0 if it's really not an issue for you. And then finally, we have gratitude. From the time that you were young, you may have been taught to be grateful for every opportunity placed in your path. You might even cultivate a gratitude practice as part of your mental health routine. Again, not in any way negative, but in the context of a negotiation, your gratitude for the offer can sabotage you into saying yes to a deal that really doesn't benefit you. So you might be particularly vulnerable if you're excited about this new job, if you're coming from a toxic work environment, or if you're feeling a bit desperate to close the deal. Your gratitude can convince you to not negotiate at all, because what would happen if the employer doesn't think that you're grateful for the opportunity? So again, take a moment and write down a rating of 3 if gratitude is always front and center for you, 1 if it can trip you up once in a while, or 0 if this is really not an issue for you. So these are the most common blind spots that sabotage us in negotiations. If you've taken the time to do it as we've moved along, you have already assessed your past tendencies. If you haven't, then you can pause the video and do that now. But now it's time to assess them in light of your current job offer, the current situation that you're in. So in the second column titled Current Situation, use the same rating scale of 3, 1, and 0 to assess your risk of experiencing these blind spots in your current job negotiation. So if you think that blind spot is high risk, given the circumstances, give it a 3. If it might come up, give it a 1. And if it's really not on your radar, give it a 0. And then do the same thing for the third column titled People and Relationships. So to assess this column, consider the people involved in the job offer. If you have a previous relationship or experience with them, if you've built a relationship there, if you hold any kind of emotional response when you think about them, those people might be contributing to your self-sabotage. So, for example, if you really, really like your new boss and you want them to like you, you might want to give yourself a 3 for people pleasing. If you feel like your boss is doing you a huge favor by hiring you, you might rate that a 3 for gratitude. Now, once you're done, add up your scores for each of the blind spots. The ones with the highest ratings are simply the ones that are likely to come up for you before, during, and possibly after the negotiation. As I said, later on, we'll talk about how to manage these actively, but for now, it's enough that you're starting to catch them inside of your self-talk. At the Harvard School of Negotiation, which is the largest source of negotiation resources worldwide, considerable attention is paid to helping students develop strength in 2 key areas that are essential for successful negotiation. Depending on how you were raised, these might come easily to you or they may be difficult, in which case they might actually be blind spots for you. Regardless, learning how to leverage your empathy and lean on your core values to clarify your negotiation position are highly effective steps to improve your negotiation skills. Empathy is your ability to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, in this case, your employer. It's the skill that helps you understand their needs and concerns, and it supports you in adapting your negotiation position to optimize your benefits. Empathy is important because when people feel seen and validated, it builds rapport, which is the foundation for a relationship. Your likelihood of getting what you want increases exponentially if you're able to lean in and build a relationship with your future employer. So if it doesn't come naturally, how do you practice empathy in the context of your job negotiation? Well, it goes back to that definition of negotiation that we discussed at the very beginning of this course. The process is all about getting to a mutually beneficial agreement. If you start with that outcome in mind, it's a lot easier to practice empathy. So before you launch into your requests, take some time to listen and ask questions about the terms they presented in the offer. Assumptions can be deadly in a negotiation, so it's always best to test those assumptions by asking open-ended questions that help you understand the employer's position. Your goal is to identify the pain points and frustrations that the employer is experiencing and use those to adapt your negotiation strategy. So listen to what they're saying and what they're not saying. Prod gently to test assumptions, listen for their feelings, and then validate and paraphrase. When they insist on a start date of next Wednesday, that's an opportunity to ask some questions and learn why the situation is so urgent. Is something happening next week? Is the team in desperate need of leadership? Is there a deadline? If you can pull out their feelings, validate them. Say, it sounds like you're under a lot of pressure to deliver. That step of validation is like magic in building your relationship. And when you hit on words that ring true, you'll know. They'll nod, they'll relax a little, they may open up and share a bit more. And that's an opportunity to paraphrase. You might say, it must be so frustrating for you to have such tight deadlines, but no leader to really keep that team on track. Taking the time to ask questions about different terms that are outlined in their job offer is key to understanding where their firm boundaries lie and where you have room to negotiate and adapt that offer. So if empathy is something you do every day, you're probably good. But if this is all new, you might want to consider practicing with your family and friends in the meantime. The other key element to success is a strong understanding of the core values that guide you. These are the irrefutable beliefs that you align to. Your values motivate you, and when they're honored in a negotiation, they can lead to higher levels of satisfaction and success in your future job. The problem is that not everybody can clearly identify their core values related to their work, but they are a powerful tool for understanding the why behind your desired outcomes and your boundaries in a job negotiation. So to negotiate successfully, you should be able to answer these questions easily. What drives you to succeed? Why did you choose this path? Why is success important? What does it mean to you, your family, to your community? And how might this job negotiation help you live your values in your work? If you can answer those questions easily, then you are ready for the trading of benefits and terms that inevitably happen in a job negotiation. If you're deeply connected and you can articulate your core values, then when your employer suggests a trade or a concession, you can very quickly consider that concession through the lens of the values that drive, motivate, and sustain you. If you're not clear on your core values, you might find yourself negotiating away benefits that matter or saying yes to terms that are misaligned to your core needs. So if the answers to these questions came easily and you can articulate your core values, then you can skip to the last step of exercise 2 and just document them there. But if those questions don't come easily, then exercise 2 is going to help you get to the heart of your core values. So start first by imagining the job that you're being offered. Once you sign that contract and settle into the new role, what do you hope is going to be different? What will you have that's new? A new title, a bigger budget, bigger staff? What will you do differently? Will your work change? Will how you work change? And how will you be different? Will you have more personal time, less personal time? Will you be more fulfilled because you're working on more meaningful work? Take the time to write out at least 10 things that will change for you as a result of this job. And then look for themes. How are they connected? And then finally, what comes through for you? What are the 3 most important values that should be at the center of this job negotiation? If nothing else, the negotiation needs to honor those 3 values because that will ensure that you walk away completely satisfied. Before we move on to building your strategy, I want to address some of the common myths associated with negotiation and offer you a reality check in terms of some of the benefits. The first myth is your fear that the employer will retract your job offer and go on to the next candidate if you ask for more. That is simply not true. As I've said many times in this course, the employer wants the best person, not the cheapest person. Many organizations also have policies in place that restrict negotiation to one person at a time. In other words, you might actually need to reject the job offer for the employer to be able to move on to the next person. Next, you might worry that you'll be seen as demanding and difficult, or you'll damage the relationship if you negotiate. Well, that is a risk if you choose to go into negotiations as a demanding and difficult person. But as long as you follow the advice in this course, you'll be seen as collaborative, committed, and as someone who knows your own value. Third, you might worry that you won't get what you want anyway. Well, if you never ask, I guarantee you are never going to get what you want. If you do ask, you're creating the opportunity for the employer to say yes, but they're not a mind reader. So if you don't ask, they don't know what your priorities are. I often hear candidates say that they'll defer negotiation until they've been in the job a while, thinking it will be easier to get what they want once they've proven themselves. The reality is you can negotiate substantial increases to your total package value. 20 to 25% is not unreasonable in a lot of circumstances. But once you've given away your leverage and you've said yes and signed the contract, you'll be lucky to get 5%. And then finally, I hear it's not worth the effort. It's too big of a risk. I would really challenge that by saying it's always worth the effort because no matter what, it exposes the truth about your new employer. The only risk you legitimately face if you go into a negotiation prepared and willing to work toward an agreement is that you might find out that you actually don't want to work for that employer. During a negotiation, they're trying to get you to say yes. And if during this time you see red flags in terms of how they treat you, pay attention. On the flip side, negotiation is a powerful process that does more than just put extra money in your pocket. First, it helps you build confidence and competence in setting boundaries and defining your value. And as you move into that next role, you're going to have to set boundaries and expectations around your work and your time. So starting your relationship by demonstrating that you will stand up for what's necessary is an excellent way of building a respectful relationship with your new boss. Asking now for what you need and want mitigates your risk of resentment down the road. If 6 months from now you were to find out you could have asked for benefits that were worth thousands more, how will you feel? Ultimately, negotiating, especially for non-salary benefits of your job, represent an opportunity to create the conditions that optimize your success in this new role. And finally, we can't forget about salary. An extra 20K is an extra 20K, but we don't often think about the compound interest effect of negotiating salary. That 20K compounds every year with annual increases and bonuses based on your salary. So if you negotiate an extra 20K right now, after 5 years, you'll have made at least an extra $100,000 than if you had not negotiated at all. So as I said on the last slide, negotiation, it's always worth the effort.